Seoul does not slow down for rain. It never has. The city moves the way it always moves, fast and indifferent, and brilliant with neon light bleeding into wet pavement. And on a Tuesday night in November, nobody is looking at the man sitting on the curb outside a convenience store on Uljiro Street. Nobody looks because looking costs something. He is not hiding. That is the first thing you notice if you notice him at all. He is simply there, in the way that abandoned things are simply there. A coat left on a bench, a shoe without a partner. He sits with his hands open on his knees, palms up, like a man who has stopped pretending he is holding something. His name is Kang-soo. 48 hours ago, that name made men lower their eyes in expensive restaurants across 3 districts of this city. 48 hours ago, that name opened doors that had no handles on the public side. 48 hours ago, if you had whispered that name into the right ear at the right moment, you could have made a problem disappear before it finished becoming a problem. Tonight, that name is soaking into a gutter on Uljiro Street, and Seoul is stepping over it without breaking stride. A woman in heels navigates around his outstretched leg without looking down. A teenager stops, holds up a phone, takes a photograph, walks on. A child stares with the unfiltered honesty that only children are still capable of, until a hand finds the child's shoulder and pulls them gently back into the current of the crowd. Everyone has somewhere to be. And then, a pair of boots stop. They are not remarkable boots. Charcoal gray wool coat, 2 grocery bags, hair that the rain is beginning to flatten softly against her jaw. She looks like Tuesday. She looks like every ordinary thing this city is full of, and she has stopped in a way that nobody else has stopped, which means something in her saw something in him that everyone else decided not to see. Her name is Amara Diallo. She is 38 years old. She works in a small architectural firm 3 blocks from this convenience store. She has been buying the same groceries from this same store every Tuesday for 2 years, and she is tired in the specific way that people are tired when they have been managing their own life alone for long enough that the management itself has become exhausting. She is not fearless. She would tell you herself she is not fearless. But she is strikingly beautiful in the way that has nothing to do with effort, the kind of beautiful that exists whether she is dressed for an occasion or standing in November rain with 2 bags of groceries and nowhere particular to be except home. And tonight, on this particular Tuesday, she is not walking home. She is stopping. She crouches down, not the tentative crouch of someone who is about to change their mind. All the way down, grocery bags set on the wet pavement beside her, until she is at eye level with a man who has not lifted his face to look at anything for what appears to be a very long time. She says something simple. Are you hurt? Not, who are you? Not, what happened to you? Not the cautious distance-keeping question of someone who wants to help from far enough away to stay safe. She asks the only question that matters in that moment. Are you hurt? Kang-soo lifts his eyes. Later, she would struggle to explain what she saw in those eyes. Not danger. She had expected danger, some animal warning system that would tell her to stand back up and keep walking. She did not find danger. She found something much harder to walk away from. She found recognition. The specific look of a person who has lost something so fundamental that the loss has become the new architecture of their face. She knew that look. She had worn it herself for about 8 months, 3 years ago, when the apartment got quiet in a way that apartments are not supposed to be quiet. She picked up her grocery bags. She said, "There is a bus shelter 2 streets over. Or you can come inside and I will make tea." She said it the way you say something when you have already decided, and the words are just the formality. Before we go any further, I have to ask, where in the world are you watching this right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who is up at this hour with me. He stood. It took him longer than it should have. A man his size. A man who had once walked into rooms that went silent at the sight of him, pushing himself upright against the wall of a convenience store with the careful effort of someone who is not entirely sure their legs will cooperate. He did not thank her. He did not speak at all. He simply stood, and after a moment, he followed her. And Seoul kept moving around them like they were nothing, like they were just two more people in the rain, which, in that moment, was exactly what they were. Her apartment is on the 4th floor of a building that has no elevator and makes no apologies for it. The stairwell smells like someone cooked something warm an hour ago, garlic and sesame, and the fluorescent light on the 2nd floor flickers in a rhythm that she has stopped noticing, and he notices immediately. Everything about this place is the opposite of where he has spent the last 30 years. There is no security. There is no staff. There is no architecture of power. There is a door with 2 locks and a small wreath that has been on it since last winter. Inside, she does not make a production of it. She sets the groceries on a small kitchen counter, turns on a lamp instead of the overhead light, and points to the bathroom with the efficient hospitality of someone who has decided not to overthink this and is committed to that decision. Dry towels are in the cabinet under the sink. There is a first aid kit on the shelf above the mirror. Kang-soo stands in the center of her living room and looks at the apartment the way a man looks at something he does not have a category for. It is small. It is clean. There are 2 plants on the windowsill that are alive. There is a bookshelf that takes up an entire wall and is used as an actual bookshelf, not a decoration. There is 1 photograph on the wall, Amara and another woman, laughing at something outside the camera frame, the kind of photograph that exists because someone caught a real moment rather than arranging one. He has not been in a room like this in decades. He is not sure he has ever been in a room like this. He went to the bathroom. He stood in front of the mirror for a long moment before he turned the tap on. The face in the mirror was not one he recognized immediately. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because he had not looked at it without the armor of context in so long that it startled him. No office, no subordinates, no table between him and the next man. Just a face. 54 years old, bleeding slightly. Tired in a way that sleep had stopped fixing years ago. He cleaned the cut above his brow with the precision of someone accustomed to damage. He folded the bloody cloth neatly and placed it at the edge of the sink. Old habits. When he came back out, there was tea on the table. She sat across from him. She did not ask him anything yet. She just drank her tea and let the silence be what it was, which was heavy and present and surprisingly not hostile. He drank the tea. It was barley tea, simple, the kind of thing his mother used to make. He could not remember the last time he thought about his mother. She asked him first about the cut. Not who gave it to you, just whether it needed more than a bandage. He said no. She accepted that. Then the quiet came back and settled between them like a third person at the table, and she let it stay for a while before she spoke again. She said, "You do not have to tell me anything." He looked at her across the small table, and something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not the way shifts happen in stories where people are trying to be noticed shifting. Just a small movement behind the eyes, like a door opening into a room that has not had air in a very long time. He said, "I know." What happened next was not a confession. It was not an explanation. It was something closer to a man sorting through wreckage out loud, not asking to be rescued from it, just needing to move some of it from one side to the other. He said he had a disagreement with his business partners. She did not react to the word business. He said the disagreement had been coming for a long time. He said he had made a mistake, not the kind of mistake you make once and correct, but the kind you make slowly over years, trusting the wrong kind of loyalty. She nodded. She understood that kind of mistake personally. She told him she had trusted the wrong kind of loyalty once. She said it plainly, without performance, the way you say something that used to hurt and has now simply become fact. He looked at her. He said, "Did it get better?" She thought about it genuinely, which he noticed, because people had stopped giving him genuine answers to questions a very long time ago. Everyone around him calculated before they spoke. Even their laughter was calculated. She said, "It got different. Different is not always better, but it is survivable. I need to know where you stand right now. Do you think Amara should have let him in? Comment yes or no and tell me why, because this decision is about to change everything for both of them." He did not respond to that right away. He turned his mug slowly in his large hands, a small rotation, back and forth, the movement of a man whose body needs to do something while his mind catches up. Then he said something that surprised her. He said, "I have a son." He said it the way you say the name of a country you have been exiled from, with the specific pain of something that is still real but no longer accessible. She did not fill the silence after that. She let him own it. He said, "He is a doctor. He saves people." And then, very quietly, as though he was not sure he meant to say it out loud at all, he said, "I do not know where he learned that from." Amara Diallo looked at this man across her small kitchen table, this man who had arrived bleeding and soaking from her Tuesday night, and she felt, without knowing any of the facts she would learn later, that she was sitting across from someone who had built something enormous and lost something small, and somehow understood too late which one was worth keeping. She refilled his tea without asking. He let her. The knock at the door came at 11:47. Not a loud knock, not the knock of someone announcing themselves. The specific, quiet knock of someone who has found what they were looking for and does not want anyone else to know they have found it. Amara's hand froze on the kettle. Kang-soo was on his feet before the second knock landed. The transformation was immediate and total and slightly terrifying to witness from 3 feet away. The man who had been sitting with open hands and a soft voice was simply gone, and in his place was something else entirely, something that occupied its own space differently, something that the air in the room adjusted to without being asked. He moved to the side of the door without making a sound. He looked at her, a single look that said more than a paragraph of instruction. She understood it the way you understand something in a dream, without being able to explain how. She set the kettle down quietly. She walked to the door. She asked, "Who is there?" A voice came back. Old, steady, carrying the particular gravel of decades of cigarettes and loyalty. It said, "It is Beck. Tell him it is Beck." Kang-soo closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he nodded at Amara. Old Beck came in, and he looked at Kang-soo the way a man looks at something he was not entirely sure he would find, and is enormously relieved to have found. He gripped Kang-soo's arm with his 4.5-fingered hand and said nothing for a moment, just held on. Then he said, "Director Park knows you are in this district. He does not know which building yet, but he has given an order." Kang-soo said, "What order?" Old Beck looked at Amara, then back at Kang-soo. He said, "Anyone who shelters you becomes a liability." His word, liability. Amara Diallo did not know yet what that word meant in the specific language being spoken in her apartment at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. But the audience does. She had made tea for a man whose presence had already made her a target. She had let danger into her home, not because she was reckless, but because she was human. And now, the city outside her window, which had seemed indifferent an hour ago, had become something else entirely. It had become a thing that was looking for her building. Old Beck left after 10 minutes with a route and a timeline and the address of a safe location 3 districts away. He looked at Amara on his way out, with the expression of a man who wants to apologize for something he does not have the language for yet. Then he was gone, and the stairwell door closed, and the apartment was quiet again. Kang-soo said, "I will leave before sunrise." Amara said, "All right." He said, "You should not have let me in." She said, "Probably not." He almost smiled, almost. The ghost of it moved across his face and was gone before it fully formed. She took his jacket from where she had hung it near the radiator to dry. She was going to fold it and set it on the chair for him, and that is when it fell out. A newspaper clipping, folded so many times the creases had gone soft, the paper worn at the edges, the way paper gets when hands have opened and closed it repeatedly over a long period of time. She picked it up from the floor without thinking. She almost handed it back without looking. She looked. It was not a crime report. It was not a business article. It was not anything she had been half preparing herself to find since the moment old Beck said the word liability, and she started quietly assembling the shape of who this man might actually be. It was a photograph from a local newspaper, a medical school graduation ceremony. A young Korean man in graduation robes, lean and serious-faced, standing with a slight smile that did not quite reach his eyes, holding a diploma. The caption beneath it read, "Min Jae Kang, ranked 2nd in the nation. Begins residency at Seoul National University Hospital." The date on the clipping was 6 years old. Amara stood with the clipping in her hands. She looked up at Kang-soo. He was watching her read it. He had not moved to stop her. He was not embarrassed. He was doing something harder than being embarrassed. He was letting her see it. This man who had arrived bleeding on a gutter on Uljiro Street, this man whose name made old Beck travel through a dangerous city at midnight to find him, this man who had not carried a weapon inside the jacket she had just dried near her radiator. He had carried this, a 6-year-old newspaper clipping of his son's graduation. Folded so many times, the paper had gone soft with the handling of it, close to his chest. She did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would not be smaller than the truth she was holding in her hands. He said quietly, "Give it back, please." She folded it exactly as it had been. She handed it to him. He took it with both hands, which she noticed, and put it back inside the jacket. And just like that, she knew exactly who she had let in out of the rain. Not all the details, not the name, not the district, not the 30 years of decisions that lived between the man on the curb and the father who carried a newspaper clipping until the paper went soft. But the essential thing, the thing underneath all the other things, she knew. The next hour was the quietest the apartment had ever been with 2 people in it. She made food, simple food, rice and soup, the kind of meal that requires no drama and offers warmth without asking for anything in return. He ate. He ate the way someone eats when they had forgotten that hunger was something they were allowed to have. She told him about the architectural firm, small projects mostly, residential renovations, a community library once that she was still proud of. He listened in a way that people rarely listen, completely, with no visible impatience, the way a man listens when he has nowhere to be and has remembered that having nowhere to be is not always the worst thing. He told her his father had wanted to be an architect. She looked up. He said, "He never got the chance. He died before." She said, "I am sorry." He said, "It was a long time ago." But the way he said it told her it was not long enough ago. Later, she cleaned the bandage on his brow. He sat on the edge of the couch, and she stood in front of him with the first aid kit, and neither of them spoke while she worked. The cut was not deep, but it had not been treated carefully before she had insisted, and there was the particular intimacy of someone tending to a wound on a person they had met 3 hours ago that made the silence feel somehow earned rather than awkward. When she finished, she stepped back. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Before dawn, you said." He said, "Before dawn." She said she would set an alarm. She went to the smaller room, and for a while, the apartment was simply an apartment, 2 people in it, rain outside, a lamp on, the ordinary, extraordinary fact of 2 strangers who had shared a meal and a silence and something that did not have a proper name. If this story is already doing something to you, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Hit subscribe, because what happens in the next few minutes is the reason this story needed to be told. The sound came at 2:14 in the morning, not a knock this time, footsteps, multiple sets of them, deliberate and unhurried, which is more frightening than rushed footsteps, because rushed footsteps belong to urgency and unhurried footsteps belong to certainty. Someone who is certain they have found what they came for. The footsteps stopped outside Amara's building. Kang-soo was awake. He had not slept. He was sitting in the lamplight with one of Amara's books open in his hands, not reading it, just holding something that belonged to a different kind of life, when the particular quality of the silence outside changed. He knew that silence. He had sent men into that silence himself more times than he could name. He stood up. He went to the window. He looked down from the 4th floor at the street below. Director Park had not sent investigators. He had not sent questions. He had sent a message. And messages of this kind, in the language Kang-soo had spoken for 30 years, were not addressed to him. They were addressed to anyone in the vicinity of him. Amara was the vicinity. He walked to Amara's door. He knocked once. She opened it in 4 seconds, which meant she had not been sleeping either. He said, "There are men outside." She looked at him steadily. She said, "Your men or the other kind?" He said, "The other kind." She said, "How many?" He said, 3 that I can see." She thought about this for a moment, with the compressed efficiency of someone running calculations. Then she said, "What do they want?" And he told her the truth. Because she had folded the newspaper clipping back exactly as she had found it and handed it to him with both hands, and a man can only be given so much grace before the truth becomes the only adequate response. He said, "They want to send a message, and right now you are the message board." Director Park sent men to a civilian woman's home in the middle of the night because she made tea for a stranger. I need you to tell me in the comments how angry you are right now, because I am not okay. There is a kind of moment that only exists at the intersection of who you have been and who you might still become. Most people never reach it. Most people's lives do not require it. It is a specific pressure, the pressure of a choice in which every available option causes suffering to someone, and the only variable is which suffering and whose. Kang-soo stood in Amara's hallway at 2:17 in the morning, and he reached that intersection. He could go out the back. Old Beck had given him a route. 3 districts away, there was a safe location, and he could be in it before the men outside finished their conversation and made their move. Amara would be questioned. It would be unpleasant. But she was a civilian, and civilians had a certain protection, even in the language he had spoken for 30 years. She would survive it. He could. He stood there. He did not go out the back. He took out the phone old Beck had given him, the one that had a single contact saved in it, under no name, just a number, and he dialed. It rang 4 times. A voice answered that was careful and controlled, and sounded like a younger, softer version of the voice standing in the hallway. Kang-soo said, "Min Jae." Silence. He said, "I know you do not want to hear from me. I know I do not have the right to ask anything of you. I am going to tell you where I am and what is happening, and I am going to ask you anyway. Because there is a woman here who stopped for a stranger in the rain tonight, and she is about to pay for that, and I am the only stranger she has." Min Jae is on the other end of that phone. His father has not spoken to him in years. Tell me in the comments, do you think Min Jae comes? Yes or no? Because everything that happens next depends on his answer. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted long enough to be a kind of answer in itself. And then Min Jae said, "Give me the address." Min Jae arrived at 2:51 in the morning in a white medical coat over dark clothes, having come directly from a late shift at Seoul National University Hospital, having not stopped to change or think too carefully about what he was doing, because thinking too carefully about it would have made it impossible to do. He was not alone. He had called the hospital emergency liaison, citing a civilian welfare check at this address, and there were 2 more people with him, carrying the specific authority of medical infrastructure, which is a kind of authority that even Director Park's men had to navigate carefully in the open on a residential street. Director Park's men understood violence. They understood threat and counter-threat, and the elaborate grammar of intimidation. What they could not navigate was a physician in a white coat on a residential street at 3 in the morning with institutional backing, witnesses, and documentation. That was a different language entirely, a language that left marks of a kind that were much harder to manage. They left, not dramatically, not in defeat, in the specific way that men leave when the calculation has changed, and staying no longer makes the kind of sense that staying is supposed to make. They simply were no longer there. Min Jae came up to the 4th floor. He stood in Amara's doorway, and he looked at his father across that small apartment, and neither of them said the things that needed to be said, because the things that needed to be said were years long, and 3 in the morning was not the time for them. But he looked, and Kang-soo looked back, and something passed between them that was not forgiveness yet, and was not reconciliation yet, but was something that had to exist before either of those things could. The possibility, just the possibility. Amara made tea, 3 cups this time, 3 cups of tea at 3 in the morning. If this story found you tonight, share it with someone who needs to hear that kindness is still the most powerful thing in any room. Send it to them right now. Dawn came the way dawn comes after long nights, not with drama, with the quiet insistence of light that does not ask permission. Kang-soo and old Beck left as the first gray reached the window. Min Jae had gone 20 minutes earlier, back to his shift, back to the work he had built as far from his father's world as he could get, carrying something new in his coat pocket that had not been there when he arrived. His father's phone number, written on the back of a grocery receipt in Amara's handwriting, because Kang-soo's hands had been shaking too much to write it himself, and neither of them had acknowledged this out loud. At the door, Kang-soo turned to Amara. He did not have words ready, a man who had spent 30 years with words that could move money and people and fear across a city. And he did not have a single one ready for this moment. So he bowed, Not the small, efficient nod of professional courtesy, a real bow, deep and held, the kind of bow that costs something. Amara nodded back, just once. He turned and walked away down the stairs with Old Beck. She stood in her doorway and listened to the footsteps going down. First floor, street door, gone. She almost closed the door. Then she called down the stairwell, her voice carrying in the quiet of almost morning. She said, "The boy in the photograph, did he graduate top of his class?" The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, from somewhere below, a voice came up through the stairwell, rough and quiet, and carrying something it had not carried at the beginning of the night. Second in the country. Then the street door opened and closed. Amara went back inside. On her kitchen table, next to the 2 empty mugs, was the newspaper clipping, unfolded, laid flat, like something finally set down after being carried for too long. He had left behind the only thing he was carrying, the only thing that had been close to his chest all night, the one thing that was not armor and not power and not 30 years of decisions made in the language of fear. He had left his son's face on her table. She stood there for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair where he had sat. She picked up the clipping. She looked at the young man in the photograph, serious-faced and slightly smiling, ranked second in the nation. Not knowing that somewhere in a city that does not slow down for rain, his father had been sitting on a curb carrying proof of him. She folded it, carefully, exactly as it had been. Kung Su walked away from Amara's apartment with nothing. And that nothing was the first honest thing he had owned in 30 years. But Director Park is still out there. Min Jae still has that phone number in his pocket. And Amara Diallo still has a newspaper clipping on her kitchen table. If you need to know what happens next, subscribe and turn on notifications, because part 2 is coming and it starts exactly where this ended. In the quiet after the storm, before everything breaks open again.